following program is a Springer Podcast Network production.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Pro Wrestling Focus. It has been a while since I've done any episodes of Pro Wrestling Focus, but that all changes today. We're back with an all-new episode. This is episode number 44, and Pro Wrestling Focus is now officially under the Springer Podcast Network. So, for today's episode, we are going to talk about last night's big title change, CM Punk capturing the WWE World Championship from Sami Zayn, discuss the fallout from that, all that and more on Pro Wrestling Focus. Alright guys, let's get into it. You know, last night on Monday Night Raw, it was originally scheduled to be the rematch between Cody Rhodes and Sami Zayn for the WWE Championship. Because, you know, at Night of Champions, you saw it, Sami Zayn captured the WWE Championship in a triple threat match involving Cody Rhodes and Gunther. And Sami got his big moment, the moment that he worked so hard for all of his career to become champion. And, I was happy to see Sami get his moment. I was ecstatic. I was thrilled for him. It was awesome to see. But at the same time, I was thinking in my head, like, how long is this going to last, Is Sami going to be a transitional champion? How long is the Sami Zayn title run going to last? And, well, it didn't last very long at all. Kind of reminded me of when Christian won the World Heavyweight Championship from Alberto Del Rio some years ago, and then he lost it, literally a few days later on a SmackDown taping to Randy Orton. And when I found out that happened, I was fucking pissed off, dude. I was so pissed off that happened and everything. But back then, I didn't quite understand the wrestling business like I do now. So when it comes to Sami Zayn and his championship run, I was kind of skeptical on how long it was really going to last, But, we go to Raw, and Cody Rhodes is attacked by Gunther. And, Gunther gives him a brutal attack, power bombs him through a table, and kicks the car door into his head, which busts him open. Got that cut that was below his ear, which, gnarly stuff, And then they determined that Cody Rhodes was not medically able to compete in the match against Sami Zayn. And then Nick Aldis, he was on Raw. He confronted Adam Pearce. He accused Pearce of poaching his main event from SmackDown. So those two had a little back and forth and everything. And, I do believe that Nick Aldis is going to be facing Gunther at SummerSlam. I do think that match is going to happen. So I expect more of a build for that here in the coming weeks. But Nick Aldis said that he found a replacement opponent for Cody Rhodes in the main event against Sami Zayn for the WWE Championship. And it turns out that it was CM Punk. And, we kind of had, inklings that Punk may be making his return on last night's episode of Raw, weeks before, it happened. We had reports coming in from the dirt sheet saying that, that Punk was pushing to return on this particular episode of Raw because it was going to be in Chicago. And, every time they're in Chicago, Punk has to be there, to make the Chicago fans happy. But, yeah, that's exactly what happened. CM Punk made his return. He faced Sami Zayn, and he beat Sami Zayn to become the new WWE Champion. And a lot of people are pissed. A lot of fans are upset about this. And some people are happy about it, But, it looks like we're getting the summer of Punk 2.0. And I believe that we're heading towards most likely a Cody Rhodes CM Punk match at SummerSlam for the WWE Championship. However, you have some complications now. Sami Zayn, where does Sami Zayn now figure into this? Those are some questions that they're going to have to figure out, in the creative room as far as that goes. But, to everyone who's upset about Sami losing the title, look, I get it. I totally understand. I was happy and ecstatic for Sami Zayn. He finally got his moment after so many years of grinding it out. Him elevating his game constantly. Him being in the Bloodline storyline. Proving that he can work with the top guys. Sami Zayn is legit. And, for him to lose the title just 9 days into holding it, it's disheartening, and I can see why people are upset. But you gotta understand, WWE is a business. I've said it many times before on this podcast, that this company is a business. They have to, draw money. They have to sell tickets. And, and right now, one of the biggest matches that you can do is Cody Rhodes versus CM Punk. I'm not saying Sami Zayn couldn't, draw money, and have a big headline match with Punk or Cody on a big PLE. He could. But, they're treating SummerSlam like WrestleMania almost, where it's a 2-night event. It's like the summer WrestleMania, if you know what I'm saying. Like, it's, it's like the halfway point in the year for WWE, and SummerSlam has been kind of treated like WrestleMania in the last couple years. So, yeah, they want to put together the biggest matches that they possibly can. And Punk versus Cody, that's a WrestleMania marquee type of match. So it makes sense for them to, go with that match for SummerSlam, even though it's at the expense of one Sami Zayn, But, yeah, I understand where people are coming from. Like I said, when, I was upset about Christian years ago, losing the World Heavyweight title as quickly as he did. I was pissed off like a lot of people were around that time, just like people are pissed off now with Sami Zayn. But, as I've continued to watch wrestling and, you understand the business where it's at now, with WWE being owned by TKO. TKO is all about that money. They are all about the green. So they want Triple H to put together the biggest possible matches for SummerSlam. So, you got to go with what's going to be the biggest headline match. And right now, you got Seth Rollins and Roman Reigns for the World Heavyweight title. And now you got CM Punk possibly facing Cody Rhodes at SummerSlam. Those are two WrestleMania marquee matches for SummerSlam. So I understand people's frustration. I understand people getting upset about Sami Zayn. They feel like Sami got screwed over, and they're already playing into that, with I don't know if you guys saw the backstage clip that they uploaded today on social media, but it had Sami Zayn pissed off and saying that it was bullshit how CM Punk waltzed in, after taking months off from TV, and he comes back and he automatically gets a title match, and he called CM Punk a motherfucker, which I was like, man. But Sammy's doing great character work. He really is. And I do think that he's still going to be involved in the storyline, even though he's not the champion anymore. Maybe they'll make it a triple threat match with Punk, Cody, and Sammy for SummerSlam. I don't know how it's going to play out, but I think it's going to be interesting for sure. And here we are with the Summer of Punk 2.0. And CM Punk returning to Raw last night and winning the WWE Championship. That wasn't the only big news item coming out of the show, as the Vision seems to have got a new member in Maxxine Dupri. Because we had a defense of the tag team titles. The Street Profits were defending the World Tag Team titles against Braun Breaker and Austin Theory of the Vision. Logan Paul was there as well, even though he's recovering from his recent surgery. And before the match, Paul Heyman had a discussion with the Vision and expressed his disappointment in how the Vision's been handling things over the last couple weeks. More so telling Austin Theory that he needed to show him something in the match tonight. So that's what happened. Austin Theory and Braun Breaker, they were using Logan Paul for the distraction. The brass knuckles were attempted to be used, and it looked like the Street Profits were closing in on a successful championship defense, but Maxxine Dupri shows up, and they've been teasing Austin Theory and Maxxine Dupri getting together on screen for a while now. But yeah, Maxxine comes in, she low blows Angelo Dawkins, which allows Austin Theory to take advantage, and he pins Angelo Dawkins and Braun Breaker and Austin Theory become the new World Tag Team Champions. And then after the match, Maxxine Dupri runs into the arms of Austin Theory. They kiss and everything, cementing their status now as an on-screen couple on Raw. And to be honest, I don't hate it. I really don't. I think Maxxine, I think she's someone that they could have been doing more with. She won the Women's Intercontinental title against Becky Lynch months ago with the help of AJ Lee. And, but it was just a temporary... She was a placeholder, pretty much. She was just a placeholder, in a way to further fuel the feud between AJ Lee and Becky Lynch. But other than that, Maxxine has just been used as a valet for American Alpha, or the Alpha Babes, whatever you want to call them, Otis and Akira Tozawa. But, there was clearly more that they could have been doing with her. And now she is the on-screen girlfriend of Austin Theory. As far as how I feel about the Vision, I think they just need to just end the Vision at this point. When it was Seth Rollins, Braun Breaker, and Bronson Reed, I felt the Vision was solid. They had Paul Heyman in their corner, it felt like a complete group at that point. But then injuries were becoming a problem, and then they kicked Seth Rollins out of his own group. They added Logan Paul and Austin Theory, and just the injuries have been piling up. Bronson Reed is on the shelf right now. Logan Paul is on the shelf right now. Braun Breaker just came back from an injury not too long ago. So, yeah, the vision is, yeah, it's definitely having issues. You know, a lot of the guys in the group are struggling to stay healthy. But I think the vision is probably on its way out. You know, they're teasing the tension there. You know, Paul Heyman, you know, even though Theory got the win and won the titles for the Vision, you know, Paul Heyman threw shade at Austin Theory still and said, oh, well, the only person that got anything accomplished tonight was Maxxine Dupri. So I do think that they're heading towards the Vision ending here soon. And, you know, I do believe that that is coming at some point. So, yeah, because, you know, I feel like, you know, once Brock Lesnar is done, and we'll be getting to Brock here in a little bit, once Brock Lesnar is done, retired, finished, then I do believe that Paul Heyman will be the full-time manager to Braun Breaker, you know, as they continue to elevate Braun Breaker into a top main event level star. But yeah, I don't hate the new pairing of Austin Theory and Maxxine Dupri. But man, the Vision, yeah, it's got to go at this point. Yeah, the Vision has ran its course, and I do believe that, you know, these guys probably need to split up and go their separate ways. All right, up next we got to talk about Femi and his interaction with Paul Heyman on Raw, and just the overall build with him and Brock Lesnar. You know, let's go back to WrestleMania. You know, as everybody knows, Femi beat Brock Lesnar at WrestleMania, and Brock seemingly retired, but Brock came back, you know, attacked Femi, said, you know, this ain't over. And then they had their rematch, and Brock beat Oba. You know, Brock threw everything he had at Oba and, you know, gave him 500 million F5s and beat him. And that's kind of when people started to really not like this feud, you know, because Oba took the loss against Brock. And I get it, you know. I didn't really care for that either. You know, when Oba lost to Brock, I was like, really? You know, like, you have him beat Brock at WrestleMania, right? Brock comes back, you know, after, you know, it was teased that Brock retired, and then he comes in and just spams, you know, the F5 like it's a, you know, like it's a video game pretty much, and he beats Oba. And I think it was kind of done to kind of cool Oba's momentum a little bit, because Oba was starting to really get over, and he was becoming, you know, to a point where, you know, the next step was pretty much for him to face Roman Reigns for the world title. You know, that was pretty much the direction that they were going to have to head into. So I think they had Oba take the loss against Brock to slow his momentum. And now we're heading into SummerSlam. You know, the big headline match. Brock Lesnar, the Beast incarnate, against the ruler, Oba Femi, inside Hell in a Cell. And man, that is going to be insane. But, you know, we got to talk about Oba's interaction with Paul Heyman. You know, Oba, I liked the wording that he used in his promo. You know, they say he's going to beat Brock Lesnar in hell. You know, like, and you know, and he said that sometimes you have to go through hell in order to get to heaven. You know, I like that. And they say that he's going to beat Brock Lesnar in front of his wife, in front of his kids. You know, so he's making this personal. You know, and it's been a kind of a personal rivalry that's been brewing between these two behemoths of men that we have here. I mean, these guys are freaking huge, man. I mean, Brock, man. I mean, Lesnar's a huge human being in himself, and Oba is just a monster of a man as well. So, I mean, having these two inside the Hell in a Cell, it's bound to be like a car crash. You know, it is going to be a brutal Hell in a Cell match between these two. And to be honest, I'm looking forward to it. You know, but at this point, everything else is just cannon fodder heading into this match because, you know, we got basically a whole month of build for this match, even though there's not really much else you can really do to build this match. I mean, are we just going to have pull-apart brawls every week, you know, PABs, as Elite's Wrestling Conversations, you know, says, oh, we got to do a PAB. Yeah, I like that guy. Shout out to him. He's got a great TikTok channel, and you know, he makes great content. But yeah, is that what we're gonna get? You know, every single week until SummerSlam is just pull apart brawls and promos that we've already heard before. I mean, come on. You know, like, I mean, we're just dragging it out. You know, at this point. I mean, honestly, this is the approach that I would have taken with Brock Lesnar and Oba Femi. I would have had Oba beat Brock both times. And then I would have had Brock Lesnar become desperate for another match with Oba Femi to prove that he can beat this guy. You know, kind of like Batista and Triple H. You know, when Batista was, you know, ascending to that main event level, you know, he just beat Triple H at WrestleMania. Triple H couldn't let it go, so they had 2 more matches, and Batista beat him all 3 times. You know, that really helped elevate Batista's status in WWE. And I think they should have taken that same approach with Oba Femi, but, you know, they've already screwed it up, you know. And then there's the whole thing about Oba giving up his King of the Ring championship match just to have another match with Brock Lesnar, you know, and people were not happy with that, and I completely understand. You know, I didn't like that direction either. You know, I mean, you just won King of the Ring. You have a guaranteed championship match against the champion of your choosing. And instead of taking that opportunity, you want to have another match with Brock Lesnar. You know, like I understand where people are coming from with that, but again, you know, they're prolonging the inevitable because they know they're going to have to do Roman Reigns and Oba Femi at some point, you know, probably at WrestleMania in Saudi. You know, I think that's what's going to happen because, you know, I know they're holding out for The Rock and Roman Reigns at WrestleMania, but I'm at this point, I'm not counting on The Rock to come in and do the match with Roman. You know, I don't think it's going to happen, but I do think that Roman and Oba Femi is definitely going to happen at WrestleMania, you know, for sure. So, I mean, I just think they're just prolonging the inevitable at this point. And, you know, maybe, Oba wins the Royal Rumble, you know, next year. And he gets his championship match, you know, that way. You know, and then he has to make the choice between Roman Reigns and if CM Punk, if he's still champion by then, you know. But yeah, I think that's what basically why they did what they did. You know, they have to prolong the inevitable, you know, because, you know, that's what Triple H likes to do. You know, he loves to slow burn. You know, he loves to build up to it, you know. Doesn't want to rush anything. But yes, I do think that at SummerSlam, Oba is going to get the win. So, yeah, it's going to be, you know, the third and final match in their series of matches against each other. And it will probably conclude their feud. And then I'm expecting that Brock will go into retirement after that. For real this time. But yeah, Obafemi, yeah, that guy is definitely destined for great things in the future. All right, let's get into some of the latest news here. Talk about Sheamus. According to reports from Fightful Select, WWE approached Sheamus while he was sidelined with his shoulder injury to negotiate a restructured deal. And the new deal reportedly featured much lower pay, and Sheamus swiftly rejected the new offer. And looks like Sheamus is going to be out of WWE here soon. He's going to let his contract expire naturally rather than being released by the company. Therefore, Sheamus will not be subject to a standard 90-day no-compete clause, which is the standard for WWE contracts. But yeah, I mean, but with a no-compete attached to it, he can sign with any promotion immediately after his contract ends. And, there's been a bit of confusion because, a couple years ago, it was reported that Sheamus signed a new 5-year contract extension with WWE. So, what's really going on, I think it was PW Insider that originally reported that Sheamus signed that new contract. So, but, we've been seeing this happen with TKO. We saw it with Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods a couple months ago. Those guys, they were approached about similar contracts. I think their contracts were actually coming up, and they were offered, I don't know if it was bad creative or if it was, much lower pay, like what's going on with Sheamus. But yeah, they've pretty much want to restructure how they handle talent contracts in WWE going forward. Because TKO's argument is that because talent is working less dates now with the lack of house shows, that, these guys should be getting paid less than, what they've been accustomed to making. So, I think we're going to be seeing a lot of veteran talent exit WWE. And besides, Sheamus, I mean, the guy, he's had a great career, no doubt. He's been a former world champion. He's won the Intercontinental United States Championship, won the Royal Rumble, Money in the Bank. Sheamus has pretty much done it all. He's had a great career. Definitely going to be a Hall of Famer someday. But, some guys, they just don't want to quit. Like this is all they know. And if they retire, they don't know what's out there for them. And, and honestly, with the amount of injuries Sheamus has accumulated over his career, retirement probably wouldn't have been the worst thing, in my opinion. But, Sheamus, he clearly wants to keep going. He wants to continue his career. So we'll see what happens. I've heard rumblings that he'll go to AEW, maybe link up with Claudio Castagnoli. As we know, him and Sheamus, they were a great tag team. They were known as The Bar. They were multiple-time tag team champions in WWE. Maybe we'll have a reunion of sorts in All Elite Wrestling. But yeah, I wish Sheamus all the best of luck in what he does next. As one talent is exiting WWE, another one is on their way into the company, as Zilla Fatu looks to be on his way to WWE. He was recently spotted in Orlando at the WWE Performance Center undergoing standard medical and administrative checks to prepare for his contract. And insiders from Fightful Select and PW Insider have reported that serious talks came together quickly over the last few weeks, and he is currently finishing up his remaining independent bookings. And, Zilla Fatu, he's one that has been rumored to come to WWE for years now. He's been building up a name for himself on the independents, and he has been trained under Booker T. Now, Zilla, he's in his 20s. He's had some character issues that's prevented him from arriving in WWE sooner. But it looks like now he is going to get his chance to be in the big leagues here at WWE. Zilla Fatu, he is the son of the late great Umaga. And if you guys remember, Umaga was a powerhouse. He definitely left his mark in the business when he was in WWE. And, now people are naturally thinking about him possibly joining the bloodline, aligning himself with Roman Reigns, the Usos, and Jacob Fatu in the future. Now, apparently the plan is for him to start in NXT with a fast track to the main roster. And then there's been other reports that he could bypass NXT completely and just start the main roster with the bloodline. Now, if it were me, if I was, thinking strategically here, I would have Zilla Fatu start in NXT. I would just have him start in NXT, give him a little run down there, maybe have him have a little run with the NXT Championship, establish him as a force down there. You don't have to keep him down there forever, he can be down there for just a couple months just to learn the WWE style, because a lot of guys, when they come over from other companies, they have to learn the WWE style, the slower pacing, the sports entertainment type of WWE style that, you have to, the match structure, I mean. When I say the WWE style, that's what I'm talking about. The match structure, that slow build, that psychology. But yeah, I would have him go down there, have a little run down in NXT, and then maybe around Survivor Series, that's when Zilla comes up to the main roster. He joins the bloodline, maybe a War Games match, something of that nature. But yes, it looks like, from all indications, that Zilla Fatu is on his way to WWE. And yeah, I'm looking forward to see what he can do. He's been doing a whole lot of talking, the last few years. So yeah, let's see if he can, be on that same level as his other family members, such as Jacob, the Usos. Let's see what he can do. Alright guys, that's going to conclude this episode of Pro Wrestling Focus. Let me know what you think in the comments. Do you agree with me, disagree with me? How do you feel about CM Punk winning the WWE Championship? Do you feel like Sami Zayn got screwed over? What do you think of, Maxxine Dupri and Austin Theory being an on-screen couple? What do you think about Sheamus leaving WWE? Let me know your thoughts and more in the comments. And this has been a Springer Podcast Network production.